think we're going live now. And
Beautiful.
it says we're streaming to YouTube.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, I guess it's good. We're going live. Oh, there we go. I gotta stop it. Okay, I am back. Here we go. My guest today. Then one second. My guest today is on a lifelong journey to decipher the human mind and behavior. He's a master practitioner of NLP and a master trainer of hypnosis who possesses unique understanding of human and action and behavior and relational dynamics. And he's certified in conflict resolution and management and also an expert in body language. He's also my teacher, my embodiment practice partner, and my friend. So, welcome to my podcast, JD Garrett.
Thank you so much for having me today, Lisa. It's good to see you as always.
I know this is going to be a fun, emergent conversation because we didn't really plan very much, but I know there's so many things that we can talk about. But I do want to start with the question I like to begin with all my guests on all my various podcasts, and that is there something from your childhood or something from your family of origin that you think has informed who you are today, who you've become?
How much is the better question?
That's what
Um,
so many people with rich lives say. They're like, where do I begin? And is the whole
yeah,
podcast about that?
well, and only because we know how much our formative years play a role in the totality of our lives, whether that's our mission or our vision or the way that we go about offering our gifts and our talents and our skills to the world. So knowing that, it's like, yeah, I have to pick one thing. I would have to say that it had everything to do with the fact that both of my parents were such different people.
Mm,
You know, my father was a Republican, conservative, gun-toting farm boy from Massachusetts, and my mother is a liberal, Democrat, blue, progressive, very spiritual and religious woman. And so I grew up in a household where there was no topic of conversation that wasn't open to hear both sides. And so
amazing.
both of my parents were serious critical thinkers, both with higher level education. My mother was a biochemist and my father was a human factors engineer and a project manager, and so they were both very intellectual people. And so I would come home from school and they would say, "What'd you learn today?" And I would share with them what I learned, and they would say, "How do you know that's true?" You know,
Amazing.
don't just listen to a teacher and have them tell you something and take it on as take that to be your truth. It's like let's ask questions about that. Let's examine it. Let's spend
I
some
can
time.
see how that plays out in your life and the person that
Oh,
you've become now,
in a
and
big
how,
way.
in a big way, in
Yeah.
a big way. Well, since we're talking about the trajectory of life, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you and why I love talking with you is you have such a rich journey, and I'm really fascinated right now with the experience of our lives as this ongoing emergent experience. And I love goal setting and planning, but sometimes I also recognize that the path that life takes us on is sometimes different than what we even could have thought up to plan. It's an
Mm,
unfolding journey. And sometimes when I look back on my life and I say, wow, I could not have set goals to take me where I have become. And there's so many stops along the way. And I'm wondering if you could do a little tour. It's a kind of a big question, but I think you're up for it. A little tour of the trajectory of your life, the path that you've been on, and some of the key points that you've touched along the way that have become this synthesis of breadth and depth that you are now.
mm. Great question. I think it all obviously every hero's journey, right? And not calling myself a hero, but
No, everyone's on a
as
hero's journey. Yes.
as a sign of transformation in life, we're all
Mhm.
kind of growing and evolving. It starts with trauma. And so I was traumatized in a really big way, both physically, emotionally, and sexually, all before the age of 10. And so my formative years were kind of wrought with fire, being born into shadow or darkness. And so that started me on this path of wanting to figure the human mind out, wanting to figure people out, consciousness, spirituality, because I wanted to figure myself out.
Mhm.
And I wanted not to end up living in that space for the totality of my life. And so there were some big demarcating moments around that. One of them being the introduction of hypnosis into my life when I was 11 years old. All to help resolve some of the stuff that I had been facing as a child. My mother and father didn't have a lot of money at that moment in time. So my mother did like the best she could. And she said, let's go to the library and you can take out books on any topic you want and you can read them and study them. And we were a big reading family. We read a lot. It's a big part of my upbringing. And so I started studying dreams, dream interpretation, the unconscious mind, hypnosis, everything I could get my hands on to figure my own mind out. So that was a pretty big demarcating moment because it gave birth to what has been the totality of the career of my life. Okay? Some other big moments were relationships that I had and how they represented and taught me as a form of reflection, both in all of the beauty they showed and the reflection on parts of me that were not whole, not healed, not resolved. And those consistent reflections giving me an opportunity to continue looking at myself over time. So that each of those relationships was demarcating in a big way. And I was blessed by the divine to be given really great teachers, really great mentors, guides, at really pivotal moments, to help show me that there was a bigger world, a broader world, and to give me hope and faith that the whole world wasn't all shadow, that there was a really beautiful light that was there too.
What age are you talking about now when you're on this path to the point? I mean, you've mentioned relationships, so I know we're talking over time.
Over
But when I
time, yeah.
think about the pivotal aspects of a teacher coming into your life, are there particular age points that
Yeah,
you?
I had a major teacher come into my life at 18 years old.
Mhm.
When I was an outcast and I was an outlier and I was a nerd and a dork and a geek and studied, the human mind as a teenager and, these kinds of things when you grow up with hypnosis and you're just going to be weird because you're studying things and aware of things that other people just aren't aware of.
Right.
So he came into my life and said, "Hey, listen, like you need to be a part of society. Like you need to figure out how people operate. You need to figure out how to make friendships and build connections and do all that." And he taught me a lot about how to cultivate those connections. He didn't teach me, however, how to make them sacred. Like,
Before we go to
yeah,
that, I want to understand when you said that you were exploring hypnosis and learning about hypnosis and training in hypnosis before that, was that solely by yourself, for
yeah.
yourself, with your own, working with your own mind? And
Well,
he
in my family,
and your family too. Okay.
yeah. I mean, obviously, they're the people that are around you the most, and so you
Yeah.
get a chance to read the book and then study the thing that's near you the most. And so I was aware of my friendships, and I was aware
Yeah.
of the people that I interacted with, and that became sort of a case study
Great.
for
So
growth.
before we go to the piece about sacredness, I want to, but for my audience, for anyone who might be wondering, because I think there's a lot of mythology and story around the concept and the practice of hypnosis. So can you just touch a little bit
Mhm.
on how you see hypnosis, what it is, why it matters?
Phenomenal. I wish we had 7 hours. So hypnosis is for me, is just the utilization of language to affect consciousness because we do live most of our lives unconsciously. And so as a result of that, we needed to be able to find a way to help influence those aspects of ourselves that are by nature we're not aware of. And if we are aware of it, it kind of floats there in the back, in what Carl Jung would call the shadow. And so for me, hypnosis is the ability to use language to help facilitate the lengthening and the deepening of a natural altered state of consciousness that we go into and out of all day long.
Mm.
When you're driving a car on a long road trip, when you sit down and you get absorbed in a movie, when you're laying in a hammock and staring into space, you're going into a state of mind that allows a more open experience, a diffused mode of attention. And so in that space, more of your mind, more of your brain is able to connect ideas in new ways. So the same creative space and imaginary space that we go into that an architect would go into to dream a building into being from just a flat piece of land. They can see where the parking lot will go. They can see how tall the building is. They can see the people going in and out of it. They can envision that. Well, that space is a creative space. Well, that's something our minds can do. Hypnosis is nothing but the utilization of language to invite that space.
Got it. So when you think about the idea of the flow space, that the man whose name I can never say, maybe you can.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, yeah.
So that he talks about flow state, and what you're describing sounds a little bit like that. So maybe that's a subset of,
I would
language, or using language and hypnosis as a subset of flow state.
I would actually call a flow state a specific type of altered state of consciousness, whereas
Okay.
meditative or meditation can be as well another altered state of that consciousness. Hypnosis is the ability to invite the person you're speaking to into any one of them with relative ease, so that when they go into that space, they have access to those parts of themselves that they would normally get by happenstance, just by either training, like if you are a snowboarder and you drop in on a huge pipe, you're going into a flow state because you can't think. There's no time to think. Your body has to just do it. Well,
Or you're going into a panic because you
or
have
you go into a panic and then you collapse and things don't work out so well. Yeah, things don't work out so well. And so that space is something we can do. We can go there if we train ourselves, we can go there whenever we want. And this is where you see seasoned meditators can literally sit down and within 30 seconds or a minute, breathe a certain way, hold their body a certain way, and think a certain thought, and boom, they drop right into it.
Mhm.
And they get the benefits of being in that space, that state for a prolonged period of time. So
What's the
hypnosis.
relationship between meditation and an induction or a hypnotic process or hypnotic state?
Uh,
Seems like
um,
you're.
the answer is there's a lot of debate about it.
Mhm.
There can be a lot of debate about it. Everybody has their own experience, their own unique experience of these states. And so I can't say with any kind of educated response that there is a one single state difference between meditation and what we in hypnosis call trance.
Got it.
I would just say it's different for everyone.
Hmm.
So, what is your fundamental experience of the two separate states? And so that's my question for you, actually. What is your
Yeah.
experience of these two states?
It's interesting because one of the things I find most fascinating is the ways that various experiences, concepts, philosophies, and modalities overlap with each other. And I want to talk with you about that too, in terms of the idea of integrating and synthesizing theories.
Mm,
But that makes it more complicated for me because in some ways my brain wants to say, oh, I see the connections between them sometimes more easily than I see the distinctions between them. I have to work a little harder because here's the difference between them. And if I guess, let's see, what would I think about that? I get meditation or going into a meditative state seems like it's a little more narrow. It seems like it has more of a specific intention, a specific tonality, whereas my experience of so far, mostly through you, with the idea of a hypnotic state or a trance state, is that it can take on more variety or has more nuance.
okay, love that.
Yeah, it could have different energies, different tone, whereas a meditative state has a little bit more of a broad and wide experience, but it's a little more one-dimensional or something like that.
And that's beautiful because that's how your mind operates.
Right.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
For me, my distinction is passivity versus activity.
Oh, okay.
So meditation for me is more passive. It's a desire to release the mind, to
Hmm.
release the monkey mind and to just bear witness from an observer standpoint.
Hmm.
The empty space between thoughts, the empty space between moments, okay?
Right.
Or being mindful of thoughts as they come by, but not attaching to them, not wanting to connect to them. It's like, oh, that's just a thought. I'm going to let that come through and keep going. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Versus hypnosis has an intention. It's like I'm going into this space to do X, to help my self-esteem, to develop more confidence, to,
Ah,
to relax my nervous system,
yeah.
to go into flow so that I can accomplish a task. It has an intention, a desire, it's proactive. And the desire is to make a change to some aspect of the way you relate to reality. Versus
Mm.
meditation is more like I'm actually I'm going to go into the space of no space and then allow whatever to arise. And when it arises, I think a thought like a mantra. And I'm just going to repeat that mantra again and again and again to create a different kind of habitual way of entering into the no mind. Okay, versus hypnosis is more aimed at let's relate to our minds in a
Hmm.
way that affects change. That's my experience of it.
I love that. It's so much more nuanced than mine. I mean, I obviously been thinking about hypnotism and the specifics of it and how it differs from things for a lot longer than I have. Specifically, since you're 11 years old is a long time to be
Long time,
exploring it and
long time.
to map it onto other things. And I guess the reason I want to tie a couple of questions together, the reason I asked you for landmarks or anchors on your journey is because I am really fascinated right now with this idea of integrating experiences. And that when I do look back on my own life and I see the different points along the way that I didn't necessarily always plan, I begin to notice where they start to superimpose and synthesize and inform the totality of who I am now and what I do now and what I bring to the world now. And I know we'll talk about vibe, and I think you call it an integral theory, right? Or an
Yes.
integral methodology.
Yes.
And my experience from talking with you all the times that we've spoken and had conversations, and also training with you and learning from you and experiencing the vibe methodology is that the concept of synthesizing is key to your life and to vibe, which we'll talk about more. But what do you see as being, you can come back to the idea of the open loop of the other points along the way, but what are the other things that you see as top level of integration or synthesis from all the pieces of your life? Is that too vague of a question? Because I
Um,
can give an
I,
example if it is.
I, yeah, would you give me an example that way I like key it
Yeah.
into what it is you really want?
Yeah. Like, for example, for me, and I relate this to having an ADHD-like brain. I didn't know that until I was in my early 50s. I just thought that I didn't finish things. I had too many interests. I was always told that I do great at the things I'm fascinated with, and if I'm not, I need to apply myself more. I never felt like I had discipline. All the stories, and I would love to go do a little bit of a redux on that at some point too. But because of that, I changed directions a lot of times in my life. And I had the story about myself for a long time that I didn't finish things, or that I I I was a butterfly, or I had all these stories, right?
Of course.
But the truth is that what I was really doing was gathering all the pieces that I needed to create my own integral experience of my life in the world and to synthesize
Totally.
all the things so that I can come up with my own unique humanness, modality, transmission.
Yeah.
And so I could name the pieces. I've been a film and television actor. That taught me aspects of performance. I'm a dance performer. That taught me, and I started late. That taught me how to take on something new that was not in the cultural expectation of what I should do. I have raised kids and homeschooled them. I've run many communities. On and on and on. There's so many things that I've done in my life, and I've studied personal growth for so many years in all different ways. I've studied all different aspects of spirituality and different kinds of philosophy. I have the experience of being an autodidact and a college dropout. I mean, there's just all these pieces that make up who I am, and I'm wondering, and I know from talking to you that that's true for you too. So I'm wondering how you see that landscape, or what I call lily pads of life.
Um, First off, I think I want to presence the fact that I believe everyone does this. Every human on the planet is
Mhm.
just doing the best they can to grab as much as they can from all of the experiences and try and change the stories that have been made up about them and the
Mhm.
stories they've made up about themselves.
Yeah,
And that
true.
the best any of us can ever do is just learn,
Mm.
is just grow as best we can and surround ourselves with people who are willing to reflect back to us different aspects of ourselves. What I love, the lily pads, that they can express, they can show us these lily pads that are worth jumping off of in order to navigate the river. I see Frogger, if anybody's watching right now, in 1980s video game Frogger, in my head right now, just trying to jump across everything and get through the obstacles and the challenges of life. For me, it always came down to people.
Yeah.
My dad told me when I was really young that there are three kinds of people in the world. There are people that like experiences, people that like things, and people that like people.
Mm.
Okay? I'm a person that likes people.
Same.
Yeah, and so I can have a really great experience, right? Like a vacation or a holiday, but if I'm not with people that nourish me and bring me joy, there's
Mhm.
something missing. Versus my dad was a person who liked things. He was an engineer. He loved, working on the car. He loved building projects. He loved things. Okay? And I just couldn't relate to that. And so over the course of my life, I've just done the best that I can to study, learn, read, absorb everything I could about people. And
Mhm.
so each and every one of those experiences from, national certification in yoga, personal training, massage,
Yeah.
all the way to obviously the psychological and sociological sciences to where we met, which is more what I would call a relational spiritual sphere, which
Mhm.
is really, embodiment work, tantra work, somatic therapy, that field, which is really it's been a relatively new experience for me. All of those act as threads that make up the tapestry of my life. And so I see that as being a beautiful part of everyone's life.
Mm.
And even though it can be challenging for those of us who have, neurodivergence, because, like you, I got diagnosed with ADHD and autism way later in my life, that there wasn't a story I could put to it. And so
Mhm.
because I didn't have a story to put to it, I just kept studying. I just kept learning. I just kept saying, what can this teach me? What can this teach me? What can this teach me? Some of my greatest teachers had no idea they were even teaching.
Yeah, I love how you draw on so many different teachings.
For me, it comes down to being principle based.
Yes.
So it's, can I take what the Stoics would call a 10,000-foot view on whatever it is I'm learning right now and get beyond the technique, get beyond the process? What are the principles inherent in it that allow it to be effective, that allow it to help somebody to reflect on themselves or reflect on their lives in a different way? And so that was a really big lesson for me,
Mhm.
was take a step back and look at the principles inside of this thing, because then it can be cross contextual. That means that
Mhm.
this principle I learned in martial arts doesn't just apply to a martial environment. It can also
Yes.
apply to love. It can also apply to friendship. It can also apply to business. And so once you understand the principle, you can see how it plays out in the human experience. And that's really where I believe humanity is headed, is to a principle-based approach or philosophy-based approach to
Mhm.
to navigating life's challenges, which is why I believe ancient philosophy still holds true today, even thousands of years later, is because their principles are still the principles.
Yeah, I think there's a principle in Hermetic philosophy called the law of correspondence or the principle of correspondence. And that speaks exactly for me to that piece that when you get under the specific and down to the first principles, then you can see how the microcosm is the same as the macrocosm and the drop is the same as the ocean. And there's all these corresponding pieces to it. And life makes so much more sense for me through that lens. And
And that's what we
uh
call fractal thinking.
yeah, fractals, exactly. Or the idea of like, you know, yeah, that things spiral out, that you can scale them down, you can scale them up, you can overlap them, synthesize them, integrate them, make metaphors of them, and it all comes down to the same principles. And that excites me as a way of experiencing as a way of experiencing the world. It's a way my mind works.
Me as well.
Yeah. And so the thing that I've noticed for myself is most recently, because I can be really abstract, that the power of language and the power of words, and I think you referenced that earlier, that's what makes meaning of the abstraction, or that's what, I know there's whole principles around the fact that we wouldn't even be like those ontological principles, and we can't even be as human beings unless we have language for what we're experiencing and who we are. And so I love that I'm a speaking coach and you work in the field of hypnosis and coaching at high levels, and the power and importance of words and how they create our reality, how they become incantations for who we're becoming and who we are.
What are spells in a spell book?
Hmm.
They're literally spelling. It's just letters and words in a book, but when recited out loud and with a specific transmission, and this is something that I learned from you, in a big way, and from John in a big way, is there's the words that you're saying, and then there's the vessel by which those words are moving through, like a
Yeah,
conduit.
yeah,
And that energy plays a role too in a big way. And so, yeah, language for me transcends just the words. It is
yeah,
literally expression. It's the energetic expression from one um, integral being to another
yeah,
integral being, and
yeah.
how that lands is a big piece. But there's also, for me, meta awareness.
Yes, for
It's
sure.
like we just talked about the difference between the forest and the trees, the
Yeah,
difference between looking into something that's nano versus looking at something that's global. Our
yeah,
mind's ability, our consciousness's ability to go to through those layers, seemingly at will, okay, with relative ease, it plays a big role too. And then of course opposable thumbs.
okay, connect that up for me. You just
Um, as an animal on the planet, we have opposable thumbs.
yes, and it's one of the things that makes us distinct from
It's
other
one of the things,
animals.
yeah, it's one of the
Yeah.
things. Language being one of them, meta
Oh, I see.
awareness being
Language
another,
and thumbs.
and opposable thumbs. And only because, and most people I don't think about this, our ability to pick something up and turn it, twist it in space allows us to literally define the perspective we take on something. So we can
Yeah.
pick a rock up and look underneath it, which gives us the ability to shift our perspective by choice because we can impact or affect or influence the reality we are in. And so it doesn't seem like much, but it actually is a really big deal. It gave birth to our ability to use tools. Well,
Isn't that one of the first principles of evolutionary biology? But I love
yes.
the piece that I love that you just brought in made me think about it more and land in it a little bit more is that not just the fact that we shape our environment, because I'd always thought of that part. Oh, we can have tools. That's sort of
Yeah.
the standard, college thing is posable thumbs allows us as human beings to have tools, which means we can make our environment. But the fact that you brought it into a relative perspective is really interesting. I had not thought about that piece before. The fact that we can move it in relationship to us is a different take on how that impacts our brain and our experience of ourselves in the world.
100%. And
Yeah.
our minds get formed, our consciousness gets formed based on the experiences we have. So if we were given the opportunity to affect our environment in a big way at a young age, our consciousness has an enriched landscape within it that we
Mm.
can draw from as we make meaning out of the totality of our lives. And so I know it seems insignificant maybe to those who just take it for granted,
Yeah.
but if you've ever spoken to somebody who was not allowed a safe space to freely explore the impact they can have on their environment, you quickly easily identify that they feel within them more limited than the people around them. And so there's ramifications in our
Yeah.
consciousness that can stretch a lifetime.
Well, as you say that, I'm feeling the depth of the impact of people's, like you said, for everybody, people take it for granted. We take for granted language. We take for granted our thumbs. But when you get down to it, the experience you just described of a person who did not always have access to their free expression, that's ubiquitous. That's most of us in some form or another.
In a spectrum,
In a spectrum, of course.
in a
What
continuum.
is it I got from you at the vibe training was um like on the one end of each polarity and everything in between.
Yeah, and everything in between. And that's the key,
Yeah.
is that we are analog beings, not digital.
Yes.
So it's not just zero and one.
Yeah.
There's an infinite ways of cutting up the space between zero and one. And we know this
Yes.
mathematically. We went to math class and we, explored infinite numbers and things like that, but didn't maybe necessarily consider the infinite numbers expression came from consciousness. We
Mm.
created numbers. Cheetahs don't walk around with an abacus, trying to count the number of, elk that they, kill, or the antelope that they kill. And no, 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 excuse me, other cheetah? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You only get 2.634 pieces of that elk. Like, it's something we created out of our consciousness. Well, as a reflection of what's going on in it,
Mhm.
seemingly infinite space between zero and one.
Yeah. Such a beautiful tie back into the trance state and to the process of using language to, I guess, dance in that space between with intentionality is what I took from you before, is that that makes it specific, that you're intending where you're going to go in that infinite space with language. And
100%. And the ability to ask questions.
right.
As a coach, as a guide, we can either make up the story that the person sitting in front of us is like us, because it's easier for us to relate the outside world to our inside world.
Hmm.
It's much more complicated to relate our inside world to the outside world, to their inner world.
Mm.
And so to see them as an infinite being means we get to ask a lot of questions to identify how they're creating and designing their life, their life force energy, their creation, their intention, and then meet them in that. And of course, we fail at it. We're human.
Yeah.
But that every client we attempt to help support, attempt to help guide, show up for in a meaningful way becomes a reflection on our own ability to grow. So it's like, okay, I'm glad that my client presented a problem to me that's almost exactly like my problem, because now I have to heal my problem in order to help them, which makes maybe both of us feel less alone
Mm.
with that challenge, with that obstacle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the
Amazing.
reason, I wanted an integral theory. I wanted to synthesize everything from a principle-based approach, because I want to really understand someone. Like, really understand them. Maybe understand them in ways they have never been understood. And what I would think that that's maybe a deeper layer of what our teacher, John Wineland, would call presence.
Hmm.
Like, where you can only be as present for someone
Yeah.
as your own capacity for presence.
Right.
And so, well, how do we break presence down? Like, there's got to be components that contribute to what we would call this macro presence. One of them being, for me at least, understanding, another being empathy,
Mm.
another being openness or flexibility. Because if I'm closed-minded about life, I won't see, I won't hear, I won't feel certain aspects of them that are real for them. But because I'm closed, I won't let it in due to my own biases, my own fallacies, the limitations I have on my own reality. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, so much in there. Where to pick that up? Woo. So all the things you just described, do you see, was that your way of articulating the way that you break down, not to oversimplify, but in order to connect the dots for myself and for anybody listening, are those the components that you see as being the 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 elements that guide you to presence?
They
Presence
are,
with another?
yes.
Okay.
For me, presence is consciousness, it's
Okay.
awareness. So it's, for me, presence is more the mind and the ability to have your body not get in the way of that kind of awareness in the moment. And so,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. And so,
Okay.
so versus felt expression
Yeah.
would be for me more in our lineage, the feminine.
Yeah.
And it's more about the body than the mind. It's more about movement than stillness. And so that's where those I needed a theory. I needed something that could help me to understand what to wrap my presence around, what to be aware of.
Presence, again, you're saying consciousness is presence for
Yes,
you, which is
for
what,
me.
in the tradition of polarity, that's the masculine in the tradition of polarity. And you're saying
Yeah.
you needed something to wrap it around, so you needed to go more into the experience of embodiment,
So as not
which can
so
be
as
feminine and masculine. So
totally.
talk to me now about polarity, because I know that you went into that world again, like you do in all the places where you draw, to deepen your experience and to bring that into your first principles thinking around everything. So tell me about how you see the world of polarity fitting into the rest of it all.
Um, got another 6 hours? So these are great questions. It's like, holy goodness, we could
I
do
know, they're
like part
big.
two,
They're
part
big.
three, part four of that
Yeah.
question alone. It's a hermetic principle,
Yeah.
the principle of polarity. And so I really wanted to understand the global, like what is present in the universe, even outside of human consciousness. It's what we're aware of, but we didn't create it. Polarity just is. And so I hadn't spent much of my life in that space
Hmm.
of polarity, and most certainly not in my body, right? Way more in consciousness than in an embodied experience. And so I went, this is something inside of me, call it intuition, call it instinct, call it insight, call it impulse. It it guided me to say this piece is really important because the body has its own wisdom. However, I've noticed that people who primarily spend time in the body, they ignore the mind. They don't want to address consciousness. They think it doesn't matter or it plays second seat or it's not as important. I would say they're all important
Yeah.
depending.
And everything
Yeah,
in between.
that's right. Depending upon how the person I'm talking to relates to that. If they've ignored their bodies for most of their lives, going into their mind is likely not going to be the place to generate real transformation in a big way. It's like
Mm.
let's do some body work. Let's do some embodiment practices and some somatics and some breath work. Why? That's the most underutilized part of their system.
Right.
Versus, I know people who are very embodied, but when you ask them to use their minds, it's like walking into like a ball of, a ball of yarn that's been just twisted and mangled in 10,000 directions, and it only overwhelms them and confuses them. So then it's like, hey, let's go into the mind. But then there's this whole soul piece,
Mm.
this whole energetic soul piece. Hey, and that for me is as well just as important as the rest of them. None of them being more or less important than the others. It depends on their model. It depends on what their blueprint is. And I didn't like the fact that if I didn't know about it and didn't understand it, I couldn't help
Mm.
because if I don't know anything about the soul, and that's what they need, I'm dead in the water. I can't help them. And then I got to say, hey, you're kind of on your own again. I can refer you to somebody maybe, and I hope that they'll help. And I don't like that feeling of not being able to show up in a meaningful way for someone if they want it and they need it. And
So
so
that
that's
requires
how I
being
play.
so wide ranging. That's a big expectation for on yourself, but that you also support your clients in becoming more of. Yeah, I want to watch the time because I know we have a time cutoff. Um, so let me try not to ask a big, huge question again, knowing that we're probably going to have to come back and follow up on some of these
I'd
open
love to.
loops.
These kinds of conversations are my favorite.
Yeah. you work with people, and as a coach and as an executive coach, and you do so many different things, and you serve so many people with your experience and brilliance and skills. And how do you do it all? And I know I feel like I've asked you that from a very logistical point of view, but because you just talked about wanting to have the skill set that can serve every area of a person, and I'm going to extrapolate to that probably a business and an organization's needs.
100%.
You just is it a cumulative approach? You just keep on adding and keep on seeing where there's gaps, and is that how what you support your clients in doing too? Oh, here's a gap, let's fill it. Oh, here's a gap, let's add on to it. Is that sort of a simplification of your approach?
That's a macro principle.
Mhm.
That's absolutely a macro principle, one I definitely pay attention to, which is what are they familiar with? What have they already experienced? And what have they never experienced? What have they
Yeah.
never considered? Let's go to the place where they've never gone. Because of the quote, if you do the same thing twice and expect a different result, that's insanity.
Right.
It's if somebody wants to create change, there needs to be a level of novelty. There has to be something new you add to the experience. And I don't care if we call it getting outside your comfort zone. I mean, every, Instagram influencer under the sun has pretty much described every metaphor around this that can possibly be. That's a macro principle for me,
Mhm.
is to do that.
Right.
The real question you're asking me is how do I do it? How do I do all of it?
Yeah.
The answer is ADHD and autism. if,
Yeah,
if
for
I'm
the
being
win.
if I'm being candid and I'm calling myself out on
Yeah,
it,
I
it's
hear you.
just the creation of a container
Yeah.
and the surrounding of myself with people who can support each other and me
Mhm.
in accommodating that neurodivergence in some strange way. Okay?
Yeah.
And I fail. Oh man, do I fail.
Mhm.
Hey, I screw up all the time. I make mistakes constantly. Hey, and I do the best I can with it. It's not intentional, but it's definitely just what it means to be human. And I would rather get to the end of my life and say I tried than to hide behind my own fear of making a mistake and not learning.
Mhm.
And so I just kept saying yes. Yes to this. Yeah, sure, I'll try. Yeah, bring that over here. I'll read that book. I'll learn that thing. I just said yes way more than I said no. And so and then when I got tired, which we're human, I got exhausted, I went, cool, how can I change my diet? How can I alter my lifestyle? How can I add a habit
Build your
that
capacity.
that increases my capacity? And
Yeah.
then and I just kept doing that.
Hmm.
But I need to make sure that I give credit here. I am
Yeah.
surrounded by some incredible humans, you being one of them. Okay?
Thank you.
You and I have the relationship and the connection where you can call me out on whatever you're seeing in my blind spots. And you and I'll talk about it, talk through it, and I'll learn. I'll learn from you. Okay, so I want to say I stand on the shoulders of giants. And one day I hope to be a giant that others stand on the shoulders of.
I think
So,
you're being very humble.
you know what I mean? Like it's super important, like for me at least, that I did have incredible teachers, that I still have incredible teachers, and that my partners and my friends, the people that I work with, my tribe, hey, they are incredible.
Mhm.
They're geniuses, absolute geniuses. And so when they share something, I'm like, keep talking and don't stop until I tell you. Because they've got, like wisdom just pouring out of them. And I'm like, yeah, taking that, taking that, taking that. And then I'm asking questions.
Yeah.
Like, where do you see that happening in me? How can we contribute more to humanity? Like I'm asking these bigger questions
Hmm.
to be able to help be a part of the solution
Yeah.
and not contributing to the problem, even though I'm sure there are people somewhere that are like, no, you contribute to the problem. It's like,
Well, I mean, it's part of the whole thing, the light and the
yeah,
dark, the good and the bad, the
you
whatever. It's
got you
just
got
part
it.
of what we do as human beings. But I want to ask you about, well, first of all, I really want to honor your well, I think you're amazing. I adore you. And and I am so love how much humility you bring along with the giftedness and the generosity that you bring to the people that you bring together and the tribes that you create, and how you how you show up for so many people, and how you keep on growing over and over and over again, and how you reach out. And I really appreciate the honoring of the lineages that you come from and the recognition and attribution, because that's not something that everyone does. And it becomes even more difficult to do when you're a synthesizer, when you are bringing first principles together, when you are drawing from so many different areas. It's really fucking difficult to remember exactly where all the pieces come from and even to parse them out because you've mushed them all together. And so I really appreciate that you do that. But before I let you go, I would love you to speak for a minute to this larger question of why. What are you up to in the world, really? What are you doing? What are you here for? What's the reason behind it all?
Um, in my opinion, humanity is on the precipice of a massive evolution. I mean, massive. And before the dawning of the light comes the darkest dark.
Yeah.
And so for me, I feel like humanity's in the middle of a very, very dark moment because that's what happens to give birth to a new light.
Mm.
For me, that's just how it goes. That's a part of the journey. And so I want to help humanity begin to think about reality in an integral way, not division, not separation, not compartmentalization, but the
Mhm.
whole. Let's look at the whole. And if we're going to look at a part, let's look at how the part plays into the whole. You know what I mean? And so that we can have a more holistic approach to understanding each other.
Mhm.
Even if we don't agree,
Yeah.
that's okay. But at least we can say we can acknowledge and appreciate the other person's vibe, the other person's way of relating to the world, even if it's not our way and we see it as being unjust or unfair or. For me, that first step in being aware of and acknowledging the other person's isness, their being, and how they came there allows us to say that makes sense. It's understandable why you would be here. And so we can agree that both of us have a completely different point of view on this, and
Yeah.
then we can navigate coming to an agreement that allows us to live our own unique lives apart from each other while still being a part of humanity.
Mhm.
And so that's my goal, that's my desire, and not something that I think I'm going to get to the end of my life and be upset that I pursued.
Beautiful. I love that big picture vision. I love always how you articulate your thoughts and your feelings and your experience. And I love that you ended on that because it's funny. Just yesterday, I have a Tuesday segment where I share little bits and pieces from people. And I shared yesterday about That Makes Sense from John, because John had done a video about That Makes Sense. So
Okay.
I talked about that yesterday in my show. So oh my gosh. You mostly work in private. People in the public world don't generally have that much access to you. Is that correct?
True.
Is that going to change?
It
How do,
is it is going
okay.
to change. So we obviously offered our integral theory for the first time since the creation of it as an idea 20 years ago, and we offered that, and you were there. It was
And
great.
it was amazing.
It
It
was
was,
great having your
uh,
presence in the room. It was incredible, and for you being willing to go into some of the spaces that we went into in order to teach and show the value of embodiment, the value of that kind of energetic work. Thank you. Such an honor to be in that space with you.
it was
Um,
amazing.
but Vibe is going to be coming out in a much bigger way soon, where there's going to be a bunch of videos coming out and all the rest of that stuff because we've been sitting on all of it,
Mm.
waiting to prove the model because I don't want to share something if I can't back it up. And so that's what's going to be happening very
Well,
soon.
we didn't even get to talk about vibe. We mentioned
No.
it. So we said we're probably not going to get to all the things we want to talk about because like you said, we probably need hours and maybe even a series. So I think the next time maybe we do a part two, maybe we do it around vibe and how vibe came to be and what it is and what people can learn from it. But as a way of wrapping up, what are three things that you would share with someone who's listening, who's like, oh, this is abstract. What do I do with it? Life lessons that you've come to this point, and we'll wrap on that. Three
Um,
things that you'd share with everyday person. You don't know who they are. They're out there listening right now.
Okay.
You got anything? I know you
Yeah.
do.
Yes. Number one, spend time looking at principles.
Mhm.
Don't get lost in the weeds. Don't get lost in the trees and miss the forest. Take a step back and look at something that's true for everyone everywhere. And which allows us to look at the similarities between each other and not necessarily the differences. So that's the first one. Second one, be intentional, be purposeful, be conscious. Hey, be defined. Be willing to look at everything in your life and in the lives of those around you and do the best you can not to ignore any of it, resist any of it, or reject any of it. So true openness. Okay? And the third thing for me is um, the combination of body, mind, and soul. We are never any one of them without the other two. So whichever one you're ignoring, that's the one that I would spend the most time sitting with. Find help, get support, surround yourself with incredible people that are good at that thing. That way, when some roadblock or sticking point pops up, you've got somebody you can call.
Beautiful. Just one final thing. I'll put all the information in the show notes. Thank you so much. And where can people learn more about whatever offerings you want to share?
They can go to vibemethodology.com.
All
And
right.
that's the fastest and easiest place to go spend time and have fun.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time, JD. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your friendship, for your support, for all that you do in the world.
The honor and pleasure has been, is, and will continue to be mine. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you.
Thank you.